My husband and his sister left for one of their business dinners, and I was alone in the house with our new maid, the quiet woman we all believed spoke almost no English. The second Conrad's Mercedes rolled down Magnolia Drive. The mansion fell into that familiar, expensive silence. Only the grandfather clock in the foyer kept talking, tick-tock, until it chimed 7 sharp notes that echoed through rooms full of antiques and framed photos from what I'd always called a happy life. I stood in the hallway and watched Conrad in the mirror as he adjusted his tie. 35 years of marriage, and he still knew how to look like the man I'd fallen for. Navy suit, silver hair perfectly combed, confidence worn like cologne. "The reservation is at 8:30, he said, not meeting my eyes. His voice had that brisk, transactional tone he'd been using more and more lately. "Bridget's already in the car." I nodded and smoothed the front of my silk blouse as if I'd been given a role to play. These dinners had become routine, Conrad's import business expanding, Bridget suddenly an invaluable partner. I stopped asking questions months ago. Money had always been Conrad's territory, and at 61 I'd gotten used to letting him carry the complicated things. Through the window, I could see Bridget's silhouette in the passenger seat. Even from a distance, she looked impatient, checking her watch like the world owed her time. My sister-in-law had never been warm, but lately her cold efficiency felt sharper, every sentence clipped, every glance measuring something behind her pale blue eyes. "Don't wait up," Conrad added, slipping his phone into his jacket pocket. "These discussions tend to run late." "Of course," I replied automatically. The same 2 words I'd been saying for months while being excluded from every discussion that supposedly mattered. The door closed with a soft click, the engine purred, then faded away. And suddenly, our sprawling home felt too big. I headed to the kitchen, thinking I'd make tea and read until I got sleepy. The Italian marble counters gleamed under the pendant lights. Everything sat exactly where it belonged because Jessa had made sure of it. Jessa had only been with us 2 months, but the change in the house was undeniable. She was quiet, mid-40s maybe, with kind, dark eyes and hands that looked like they'd done real work all their lives. Bridget had recommended the agency that sent her. We were told Jessa's English was practically non-existent, but she managed through gestures, and her results spoke louder than words. The house had never been cleaner, meals appeared like magic. She moved through rooms like a gentle ghost, never intrusive, always helpful. I reached for the kettle. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Jessa appeared in the doorway in her simple gray uniform, hair pulled back into its usual neat bun. She held a dust cloth, but she wasn't actually cleaning. Her gaze flicked past me toward the front windows, toward the driveway, as if she needed to confirm something. "Buenos noches, señora," she said softly. I smiled, still in the habit of treating her like someone fragile in a country that wasn't hers. "Good evening, Jessa. You can rest now. They've gone to their dinner." She nodded, but she didn't leave. She stayed in the doorway, shifting her weight like she was deciding whether to cross a line she couldn't uncross. Her posture looked different tonight, less submissive, more alert. Her eyes darted again to the windows, as if ensuring we were truly alone. Then she did something that froze the air in my lungs. She set the dust cloth on the kitchen island, lifted her chin, looked me straight in the eye, and spoke in perfect, unaccented English. "Ma'am, do not eat the soup they left in the refrigerator." The kettle slipped from my hand and clanged against the marble. For a second I couldn't move. My mind refused to accept what my ears had just heard. The quiet housekeeper who barely understood a word, the woman I'd spoken around for weeks as if she weren't fully present, had just delivered a warning like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. My voice came out thin. "What did you just say?" Jessa stepped closer. Her expression wasn't cruel, just urgent, focused. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to listen to me carefully." Her eyes held mine without flinching. "My name is Jessa Martinez, and I speak English perfectly. I've been pretending not to understand for the past 2 months because I was hired to spy on you." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the counter to keep myself upright, my pulse hammering so hard it felt like it was shaking my ribs. "Spy on me?" I whispered. I don't understand." "Your sister-in-law, Bridget, hired me through an agency," Jessa said, voice calm but tight with pressure. "But not the kind of agency you think?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "That's impossible. Bridget recommended you." "Yes," Jessa said, and the word landed like a stone. "And she paid me $800 a week to report everything. What you do, what you say, your daily routine, your habits, your health, your mental state." My mouth went dry. $800 a week. To watch me, to measure me, to build some invisible file on my life while I smiled politely and thanked her for folding towels. I shook my head, trying to push the reality away. No, that can't be." Jessa didn't let me finish. "It's true," she said, "and that's why I'm warning you now." Her eyes flicked toward the refrigerator. "Do not touch the soup they left, not even a taste." I stared at her, the kitchen lights suddenly too bright, the marble too cold, the entire house feeling less like a home and more like a beautifully decorated trap. And somewhere in the silence between the ticking clock and my own ragged breathing, one terrifying thought rose above all the others. If Bridget was paying someone to watch me, what else had she been planning? "She's family." My protest sounded weak, even to my own ears. "Ma'am, please sit down." Jessa gestured toward one of the bar stools at the kitchen island. "What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear." I stayed standing. My legs felt unsteady, but my spine refused to bend. 35 years of being Conrad's wife had taught me how to receive bad news without collapsing in front of anyone. "Tell me," I said. Jessa drew in a slow breath. "For the past 2 months, I've been listening to your husband and his sister. They talk freely around me because they're convinced I don't understand English." Her eyes locked onto mine. "Mrs. Whitmore, they're planning something very bad." "What kind of bad?" The words felt strange in my mouth, like I was speaking through someone else. "They want to have you declared mentally incompetent," she said quietly. "They've been putting things into your food, not enough to seriously damage your health, but enough to make you seem confused, forgetful, unstable." Her gaze softened with what looked like real concern. "Tonight's soup has a strong laxative in it. It will make you violently sick. Tomorrow they plan to call a doctor, someone who's already been paid to sign papers saying you're not fit to manage your own affairs." The kitchen tilted around me. I clutched the edge of the counter until my knuckles went white against the dark stone. "Why would they do that?" My voice cracked. "Conrad loves me. We've been married for 35 years. Jessa's expression shifted into something like pity. "Mrs. Whitmore, your husband is in serious financial trouble. His business is failing, and he owes money to people who don't tolerate delays. Bridget has gambling debts that have put her in real danger. Together they're desperate." She paused. "They see your inheritance as their way out." "My inheritance?" I shook my head. "My parents died over 30 years ago. There's nothing left." "Your family's properties, the investments, the trust fund," Jessa said steadily. "It adds up to almost $3 million. Your husband has been managing it, but legally it all belongs to you. If something happens to you, or if you're declared incompetent, Conrad gains full control." The grandfather clock chimed 8 times from the foyer, each toll landing like a physical blow. 8 o'clock. They'd been gone half an hour. How long until they came back? How long had I been living inside this elaborate trap without knowing? "Why are you telling me this?" I asked at last, my throat tight. "If Bridget hired you to spy on me, why betray her now?" Jessa glanced down at her hands, then back up at me, eyes shining. "Because I've watched you for 2 months, Mrs. Whitmore," she said. "You're kind to everyone. You treat me with respect, even when you think I don't understand. You leave me little notes with drawings when you want something done. You always say please and thank you, even when you assume the words mean nothing to me." She swallowed, her voice growing firmer. "But more than that, I've seen how they treat you. The way your husband dismisses your opinions, How your sister-in-law rolls her eyes when you talk. How they've slowly cut you off from your friends and convinced you that you're too fragile, too naive to understand complicated matters. She shook her head. This isn't just about money, it's about control. And I refuse to help destroy someone who hasn't done anything wrong. I stood there in my immaculate kitchen, surrounded by marble and polished steel, and the framed proof of a life I'd believed was perfect, and realized that everything, my marriage, my family, my security, had been carefully staged. Not for me, but around me. The soup in the refrigerator, which I'd planned to heat up later, no longer looked like dinner. It looked like a weapon. What do I do? The question came out thin and desperate, like it belonged to a much younger woman. Jessa stepped closer, dropping her voice to a whisper. First, we get rid of that soup in a way that makes it look like you ate it. Second, we start documenting everything. Times, dates, conversations, every strange thing they say or do. And third, Mrs. Whitmore, you need to understand something important. She held my gaze. This is only a piece of what they've been planning. The sudden crunch of gravel in the driveway cut through the air. Headlights swept across the kitchen windows, casting moving shadows on the walls. They're back, Jessa breathed. In an instant, her shoulders dropped, her eyes lowered, and she slid back into her obedient, silent role. Act normal, she murmured. Don't let them know anything has changed. The sound of Conrad's key turning in the front door echoed down the hallway. In that moment, I knew my life had just snapped into a different shape. The man I'd trusted with everything for 35 years, the sister-in-law I'd tried so hard to keep the peace with, they weren't just people I misjudged, they were predators, and I was the prey they thought was already half sedated. How was the restaurant? I asked as Conrad hung up his coat in the hallway closet. My voice sounded calm, almost bored, even though my hands were trembling under the edge of the island where he couldn't see them. Fine, he said shortly, loosening his tie. Productive meeting. You should get some rest, Antoinette. You look tired. Bridget's perfume announced her before she appeared. She strode past him into the living room, heels clicking sharply on the marble. Long day tomorrow, she called over her shoulder. Conrad mentioned you might want to see Dr. Harrison about those memory issues we discussed. Memory issues. My heart lurched. I had never mentioned any problems with my memory to either of them. I'm feeling fine, actually, I replied. Bridget gave a thin, patronizing smile. Of course you are, dear. Conrad's voice carried a note of condescension I'd never really heard before, or maybe I had, and I just accepted it as normal. But prevention is better than cure, don't you think? He added lightly. He and Bridget exchanged a glance that lingered just a fraction too long. In the past, I would have dismissed it as simple sibling shorthand. Now it felt like a coded message I was only starting to decipher. I think I'll have some of that mushroom soup before bed, Conrad said, turning toward the kitchen. Long day tomorrow, and I need something to settle my stomach. Actually, I cut in quickly, I already finished it. He stopped. All of it? There was almost a full container. I heated it twice, I said, forcing a shaky laugh. You know how I get when I'm nervous about being alone. I guess I was hungrier than I thought. I suppose I'll feel it tomorrow. Another look passed between them, sharper this time. Bridget's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together in the faintest frown. Conrad's shoulders relaxed into what I now recognized as relief. No, satisfaction. Well, just make sure you stay hydrated, he said smoothly. Food poisoning can be quite dehydrating. Food poisoning. The way he dropped the phrase into the conversation as if it were nothing made my stomach twist. They were expecting me to be sick tomorrow. Violently sick. They'd probably already synchronized the doctor's visit with my predicted suffering. I think I'll turn in, I said, heading for the stairs before my mask could crack. Good night. Good night, dear, Conrad called after me, his tone warm and caring, if you didn't know what that warmth was wrapped around. I made it to the bedroom and shut the door before my legs gave out. I sat heavily on the edge of the bed, still wearing the silk blouse and pearls I'd put on hours earlier, when my biggest worry had been whether Conrad would notice I'd had my hair done. Now, that version of me felt painfully naive. That woman still believed her husband and sister-in-law were her family, not conspirators plotting her downfall. A soft knock at the door made me jump. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Jessa's voice came through, back to the hesitant, accented English she'd used as a disguise. "I brought fresh towels. Come in," I said. She entered with an armful of towels that clearly weren't needed. She disappeared into my ensuite bathroom, and I heard the quiet rustle of fabric being arranged. When she returned, she gave a small gesture toward the bathroom and silently mouthed, "Talk in there. Water running." I followed her into the marble-lined bathroom that had always been my private retreat. Jessa turned on the taps in both the sink and the deep soaking tub. The rush of water filled the space, creating a soft roar of white noise. "They believed you about the soup," she whispered, "but now we have a bigger problem. I heard them talking after they came back." My throat tightened. "What did they say?" "They've moved up their timeline," Jessa said. "Dr. Harrison, the doctor they've bribed, he's coming here tomorrow afternoon. They're going to tell him you've been acting erratically, forgetting things, having episodes. When he examines you and you're not sick like they expected, they'll claim you're having a lucid interval, but that your condition is degenerative." I gripped the edge of the marble sink until my fingers ached. Can they actually do that? Have me declared incompetent based on one doctor's opinion? "With the right documentation, yes," Jessa replied grimly. "And, Mrs. Whitmore, they already have documentation." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" "Bridget has been forging medical records for months," Jessa said. "She has a contact at a medical records company, someone with gambling debts who needed quick money. Together they've built an entire fictional medical history for you." The bathroom suddenly felt like it was closing in on me. Mirrors reflected my pale face from every angle, showing a woman who looked not just 61, but exhausted, older, worn down. Had I really been that blind to the storm gathering around me? "There's something else," Jessa added, lowering her voice even further. "About why Bridget chose me specifically." "I thought you came from an agency," I said. "What do you mean?" "I wasn't picked at random," she said. "Bridget sought me out because of my background. Before I became a housekeeper, I worked for a private investigation firm. I know how to install surveillance equipment, how to copy documents, how to gather evidence without being noticed." My knees went weak. "Surveillance? Here?" My voice cracked. "In my home?" "There are small cameras in the common areas," Jessa said. "Listening devices in your bedroom and study. They've been recording you for weeks, waiting for moments they can twist into proof. A stumble when you stand up too quickly becomes a neurological symptom. Forgetting where you set your reading glasses becomes evidence of serious memory loss. The violation felt like a physical blow. This wasn't just betrayal, it was dissection. They'd been watching me like a lab specimen, cataloging every vulnerable human moment so they could weaponize them later. "But if you know how to set all this up," I said slowly, my mind racing, "does that mean you can remove it?" "Yes," she said. Then her eyes flashed with something more determined. "And more than that, I can turn their own system against them. They hired someone with the skills to destroy you, but those same skills can protect you." For the first time since this nightmare began, a small ember of hope flickered in my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked. Jessa reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device. It looked like an ordinary phone charger, but it felt heavier, more solid, when she placed it in my hand. "This is a recording device," she said. "Military grade, undetectable to consumer scanners. While they've been recording you, I've been recording them." My fingers tightened around the device. "Every conversation, every phone call, every moment they thought was safe," she continued. "For 6 weeks now, I've been capturing everything. I have Bridget admitting to forging your medical records, Conrad discussing how to access your bank accounts, both of them laying out exactly how they plan to have you institutionalized." She met my gaze, steady and unflinching. "You are not powerless, Mrs. Whitmore. They just don't know it yet." I have phone calls with the corrupt doctor, recordings of the medical records forger, even arguments about how they'll split your inheritance once they have control, Jessa said. The water ran steadily from the taps, a constant hiss of white noise that felt like the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly shifted beneath my feet. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked. "Because I needed enough evidence to make sure we could end this completely," she replied. "One or two recordings can be dismissed, twisted, or explained away. But what I have now—" Her eyes hardened with resolve. "What I have now will destroy them." "What do they think you're reporting to Bridget?" I asked quietly. "Exactly what they want to hear," she said. "That you're deteriorating quickly, that you're confused and forgetful, that you talk to yourself, leave tasks unfinished, show signs of paranoia and disorientation. I've been feeding them a fictional story about your mental decline while documenting their real conspiracy. I studied her. This woman I'd believed was just a quiet housekeeper, realizing she'd been protecting me the entire time while I walked blindly through the danger. Jessa, I have to ask," I said. "What's your real motivation? Why risk so much for someone you barely know?" She was silent for a long moment. The rush of water filled the space between us. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a grief I hadn't heard before. "Because 15 years ago, my mother went through exactly what they're planning for you," she said. "My stepfather and his daughter had her declared incompetent and locked her in a facility. She died there 18 months later, alone, labeled as mentally ill. I was young and I didn't understand the system well enough to stop it. I've carried that guilt every day since." My eyes blurred as tears welled up. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "When Bridget came to me with this job describing what they wanted to do to you, it felt like watching my worst nightmare replay," Jessa continued. "But this time, I have the experience and the tools to fight back. This time, I can save someone." "What happens now?" I asked. Jessa turned off the taps. The sudden silence felt heavy, almost sacred. "Tomorrow, when Dr. Harrison comes, you're going to give the performance of your life," she said. "You're going to act exactly the way they've described you, confused, unstable, forgetful. While they think they're winning, we'll be setting off our own trap." "What kind of trap?" I asked. "The kind that will expose all of them," she said. "Not just Conrad and Bridget, but the corrupt doctor and the medical records forger. A trap that leads to real criminal charges and makes sure they can never do this to you or anyone else again." As we moved to leave the bathroom, Jessa touched my arm gently. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's something you need to understand," she said. "What we're about to do will change everything. Your marriage, your family dynamics, probably your entire life. Are you ready for that?" I thought of 35 years spent trusting Conrad, of the endless efforts to win Bridget's approval, of the quiet, polished existence I'd built around being a supportive wife to a man who apparently saw me as nothing more than access to money. "My life has already changed," I said softly. "Now I'm just choosing to take control of it." We stepped back into my bedroom, slipping into our familiar roles. Me as the elegant lady of the house, Jessa as the obedient housekeeper. But inside, nothing was the same. I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would bring even more shocking revelations. Because if Conrad and Bridget were willing to go this far, what else were they hiding? And just how deep did this web of lies go? The next morning arrived disguised as normal. Sunlight filtered through the heavy bedroom curtains, casting the same familiar patterns across the Persian rug that had been there for over 20 years. I'd barely slept. My mind had replayed every word Jessa said, every memory of Conrad and Bridget that now looked different under this new light. But I forced myself to move through my routine exactly as I always did. Conrad couldn't suspect a thing. I found him in the breakfast nook, reading the Wall Street Journal and sipping his coffee. When I stepped into the room, he glanced up, and for a moment I saw it, the way he was studying me. Not as a husband looking at his wife, but as someone evaluating a subject. "Good morning, darling," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "How are you feeling?" "A bit tired," I answered, which was certainly true. My stomach was upset during the night. I think that soup didn't agree with me after all. His eyes sharpened with interest, though he tried to mask it with concern. "Oh, that's unfortunate," he said. "Maybe we should have Dr. Morrison take a look at you." Dr. Morrison, our longtime family doctor. A genuinely decent man who actually cared about his patients, not the corrupt Dr. Harrison they'd lined up to evaluate me this afternoon. "I'm sure it will pass," I said lightly, choosing my words with care. Bridget appeared in the doorway, already dressed in one of her tailored business suits. She'd been staying with us for 3 weeks now, supposedly because her house was being renovated. Now I knew better. The renovations weren't the reason she was here. I was. She needed to be close enough to watch my decline with her own eyes. "Any word from Dr. Harrison about this afternoon?" Bridget asked Conrad, making no effort to lower her voice. The ease with which she discussed my medical appointment, as if I weren't even in the room, told me everything about my place in their plans. "He'll be here at 3, Conrad replied. Then he turned to me with a mask of concern. "Darling, I've arranged for a specialist to evaluate you. Dr. Harrison comes highly recommended for cognitive assessments." The way he emphasized cognitive assessments made my skin prickle. They weren't bothering to pretend this was about an upset stomach anymore. This was the opening move in having me labeled mentally incompetent. "Is that really necessary?" I asked, letting my voice wobble slightly. "I feel fine, just a little under the weather." "Better safe than sorry," Bridget cut in smoothly. "At our age, we can't be too careful about these things." Our age. She was 57, 4 years younger than me, yet she spoke as though we were both tottering on the brink of decay, when in truth, I'd been in excellent health, at least before discovering my own family had been poisoning me. After breakfast, I escaped to my study, a small room off the main hall that had always been my refuge. Conrad rarely stepped inside, dismissing my books and letters as women's interests beneath his attention. Now I wondered if that dismissal had been strategic, keep me tucked away with harmless hobbies, far away from financial documents and power. I was pretending to read when there was a soft knock. Jessa entered with her cleaning supplies, apparently intent on dusting the bookshelves. To anyone watching, it was routine housekeeping, but when she spoke, her voice was a barely there whisper. "I accessed their email accounts last night," she murmured, eyes on the shelves as her hands moved efficiently over the polished wood. "What I found is worse than we thought." My heart clenched. "Worse how?" "They've already chosen a facility," she said. "Bridgewood Manor, about 2 hours north. It's a private psychiatric hospital that specializes in difficult cases, wealthy families who want troublesome relatives to disappear quietly." The book trembled in my hands. "Disappear?" I echoed. "Mrs. Whitmore, patients sent to Bridgewood under those circumstances almost never come back," Jessa said. "The care is minimal, oversight is nearly non-existent, and the staff is very well paid to ignore what they see. Conrad's already wired a $50,000 deposit to reserve your place." $50,000. He'd spent a small fortune arranging my captivity, using money that legally belonged to me. The irony was razor sharp. "There's more," Jessa added, her voice dropping even lower. "I found emails with a lawyer about revising your will. Once you're declared incompetent, Conrad gets power of attorney. The first thing he plans to do is rewrite your will so everything goes to him, with specific provisions for Bridget." Carefully, I set my book down, afraid I'd snap it in half otherwise. "What about your recordings? Can we stop this?" "Yes," she said, "but we need them to fully incriminate themselves. Right now, we have evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted elder abuse. I want more. I want proof of medical fraud and bribery. When Dr. Harrison arrives, I need you to follow my instructions exactly." "What do you need me to do?" I asked. She moved to dust the lamp beside my chair, leaning in just enough to speak directly into my ear. "When he examines you, you're going to act exactly as confused and disoriented as they say you are," she whispered, "but you're also going to drop specific hints that show you're being coached." What kind of hints? I asked. You're going to say you see people who aren't there, but describe them in ways that clearly match what you've been told, not what you're actually experiencing, she explained. You'll forget recent events but recall distant ones with suspicious selective clarity. Most importantly, you're going to ask Dr. Harrison certain comparison questions that will force him to reveal he's been briefed about you before ever meeting you. The plan was dangerous, but I could see the strategy. If we could show that his evaluation was predetermined, we could blow open the entire scheme. And if he's more careful than that? I asked. Then we fall back on our backups, Jessa replied. I've installed micro cameras in this room and in the living room where he's likely to conduct part of the exam. Everything will be recorded. She paused in her dusting and met my eyes for a heartbeat. And I've contacted a real doctor, Dr. Sarah Chen, a neurologist who owes me a favor. She's agreed to perform an independent assessment of you tomorrow, assuming we can stop today's planned abduction. The word slammed into me. Abduction. Because that's what this was. A kidnapping wrapped in medical paperwork. If they succeeded, I'd be dragged into an institution under the guise of care and possibly never walk out again. How long have they been planning this? I whispered. From the emails I saw, at least 6 months, Jessa said. It escalated when Conrad's business started collapsing more seriously. Bridget suggested the idea after she lost her house to gambling debts. They see you as their retirement plan. The door to my study swung open so suddenly that both of us went rigid. Conrad stood in the doorway, his expression pleasant, his eyes sharp. "Everything all right in here?" he asked. "I thought I heard voices," Conrad said. "Just reading aloud to myself," I replied, forcing a light smile. "You know how I do that when I'm trying to focus." He nodded, but his eyes lingered on Jessa. She had already slipped back into character, head slightly bowed, hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had turned invisibility into an art form. "Dr. Harrison will be here in a few hours," Conrad said. "Why don't you rest before then? I want you at your best for the examination." At my best, meaning at my most malleable, most fragile, easiest to label. "Of course, dear," I said. When he finally left, Jessa and I stayed silent for a long moment, both of us acutely aware how close we'd just come to being exposed. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a new, urgent edge. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's something else you need to know about the timing," she murmured. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Your family trust, the one your parents created, has a specific clause," she said. "If you're declared mentally incompetent, the funds stay in the trust, but can be controlled by your legal guardian. If you die while still considered competent, everything goes to Conrad as your husband. But if you die after being declared incompetent, the money doesn't go to him. It goes to distant relatives your parents named as backup beneficiaries." A wave of nausea rolled through me. "So they need me alive but legally incapacitated," I said slowly. "For now," Jessa replied. "But institutions like Bridgewood? Accidents happen, patients wander off, they fall, they suddenly develop medical complications. When you're locked away in a place like that, your remaining years become negotiable." My fingers dug into the arms of my chair. This wasn't just about control or greed anymore. This was about whether I lived or died. Conrad and Bridget weren't just trying to strip me of my autonomy. They were setting up a scenario where my eventual death would be convenient and profitable. "We have to stop them today," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Whatever it takes." "We will," Jessa said. "But when this is over, when they're exposed and facing charges, your life will never be the same. Are you ready to lose everything you've known for the last 35 years? I looked around my study, the books I loved, the photos documenting what I'd believed was a solid, loving marriage, the comfortable surroundings of a life that now felt like a stage set built over rot. Then I thought of Bridgewood Manor, of being locked away, sedated, forgotten. "I've already lost everything," I said quietly. "Now I'm just going to make sure they pay for taking it." As if on cue, the grandfather clock in the foyer began to strike 12. Noon. 3 hours until Dr. Harrison arrived. 3 hours to prepare for the most important performance of my life, because if we failed, it might be my last. At precisely 3 o'clock, a black sedan glided into our circular driveway. From my bedroom window, I watched a tall, narrow-shouldered man step out, dressed in an expensive overcoat and carrying a leather briefcase that looked more like it belonged in a courtroom than a clinic. Even from a distance, something about his posture, his movements, radiated calculation rather than care. Conrad opened the door with the enthusiasm of someone greeting an old colleague instead of a supposedly neutral specialist. They shook hands, talking animatedly. I saw Conrad gesture toward the interior of the house and what looked very much like an exchange of papers before they even crossed the threshold. I started downstairs slowly, deliberately moving as if my joints were stiff and my balance uncertain. Jessa had coached me on the subtle tells of cognitive decline, things a layperson would see as authentic, while a trained eye reviewing the footage later would recognize as performance. The goal was simple and deadly precise. Give Dr. Harrison enough evidence to justify the diagnosis he'd already been paid to deliver, while creating a record that would later expose his evaluation as a fraud. "Annette, dear," Conrad called as I entered the living room. "This is Dr. Harrison. He's here to do that evaluation we discussed." Dr. Harrison rose from the sofa and extended his hand. He was younger than I expected, around 50, with prematurely gray hair and sharp blue eyes that moved like scanners, capturing every detail. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said smoothly, "it's a pleasure to meet you. Your husband has told me so much about you." My stomach tightened. A truly independent evaluator would never allow themselves to be heavily briefed by a potentially biased relative beforehand, especially not in a case involving competency. "Have we met before?" I asked, letting my brow furrow. "You look familiar." "No, Mrs. Whitmore," he said quickly. "This is our first meeting." But I caught the fleeting glance he threw Conrad's way. "Perhaps you're thinking of someone else." Bridget swept in from the kitchen carrying a tea tray, every inch the polished hostess rather than a worried sister-in-law. Her movements were crisp, efficient, almost cheerful. "I thought you might like some tea before the examination," she said, setting the tray down on the coffee table. She had laid out 4 cups, not 2, not 3, 4. It was a small detail, but it spoke volumes. Bridget and Conrad clearly intended to stay for the entire evaluation, something no ethical psychiatrist would normally allow. And for the first time, instead of feeling like a patient, I understood exactly what I was: the centerpiece of their staged performance, and the only person in the room who knew that another performance, a very different one, was about to begin. "Mrs. Whitmore," Dr. Harrison began, pulling a sleek tablet and stylus from his briefcase, "I'd like to start with a few simple questions to assess your cognitive state. Are you comfortable with your husband and sister-in-law being present, or would you prefer we speak alone?" "Oh, I don't mind," I replied, keeping my tone mild, even as a small spark of satisfaction lit inside me. By giving me the choice and proceeding with them in the room, he'd practically admitted he was willing to conduct an unethical evaluation. "They've been so worried about me lately. I'm sure they'd like to hear what you have to say." For about 20 minutes, he put me through what looked like a standard mental status exam: short-term memory tests, basic math, naming everyday objects from images. I answered correctly, but not too quickly, hesitating here and there, frowning as if searching for the right word, occasionally repeating part of the question as though I hadn't quite caught it the first time. But it was the spaces between his formal questions that truly showed what was going on. "Your husband mentioned you've been having episodes of disorientation," Dr. Harrison said conversationally at one point, stylus poised above the screen. "Can you tell me about those?" I turned to Conrad with a puzzled expression. "Episodes? I don't remember having any episodes. When did that happen?" "Just last week, dear," Conrad replied gently, radiating manufactured concern. "You couldn't remember how to use the coffee maker. You stood in the kitchen for almost an hour just staring at it." This was a complete fabrication. I used that coffee maker every morning without thinking. No such incident had ever taken place. He was inventing symptoms in real time, and Dr. Harrison was swallowing every word without so much as a follow-up. "That must have been frightening," the doctor said sympathetically, making another note. "Do you recall feeling confused by familiar things?" "Sometimes," I answered, sounding unsure, just as Jessa had coached me. "But I thought that was normal. Don't we all forget things once in a while?" "Some forgetfulness is normal," he agreed. "But what your family describes suggests a more serious pattern." Again, he treated Conrad and Bridget's statements as established truth instead of unverified claims. A competent physician would have asked precise questions, wanted to review past records, or requested to see me privately to hear my perspective without interference. "Doctor," I said, seizing the opening Jessa had prepared me for, "before we go on, could you tell me who referred you? I like to know how my doctors find their way to me." His stylus froze for a fraction of a second. "Your husband contacted my office directly," he said. "He requested a consultation." "But how did he know to call you?" I pressed gently. "Do you specialize in cases like mine?" A faint flush crept up the side of his neck. "I have experience with cognitive decline in older patients," he replied. "Yes." "What kind of experience?" I asked. "And how did Conrad learn about that experience?" The questions clearly rattled him. Before he could stumble over an answer, Conrad stepped in. "Darling, Dr. Harrison comes highly recommended," he said smoothly. "Bridget found him through her research." I turned to Bridget with wide-eyed curiosity. "Research? What kind of research?" "Medical directories," she said flatly. "Online reviews. The usual things people do when they look for specialists." But I wasn't done yet. Jessa had warned me this would be our best chance to force him off script. "Doctor, before you examine me further," I continued, "could you explain your assessment process? I'd like to understand what you're looking for." Dr. Harrison shot another quick look at Conrad. A real professional would have welcomed the question. "The evaluation considers several factors," he said. "Cognitive testing, behavioral observations, and family history." "Family history is important," I agreed. "What family history are you basing your conclusions on? Because I should mention, my parents both lived into their 80s with no cognitive issues. My grandmother was clear-minded and sharp until she died at 93. That was entirely true, and it directly clashed with any lie they might have told him about a hereditary tendency to dementia. He scribbled something onto the tablet, but I could see the tension in his face as he tried to wedge my reality into whatever false outline he'd been given. "Sometimes these conditions can develop without a genetic component," he said finally. "Of course," I replied. "But in those cases, wouldn't your first priority be ruling out other explanations? Environmental toxins, medication side effects, depression, vitamin deficiencies. There are so many reversible causes of cognitive symptoms." His unease was now impossible to miss. A patient questioning the thoroughness of their care shouldn't have shaken a competent doctor, but I wasn't just challenging his ego. I was exposing the flimsy structure under his bought-and-paid-for diagnosis. Conrad stepped in again, his smile tight. "Darling, let's allow the doctor to finish his evaluation. We don't want to take up too much of his valuable time." Valuable time. The phrase lodged in my mind like a splinter. This didn't sound like a man paying for a medical consultation. It sounded like a man paying for a specific outcome. "Of course," I said pleasantly. "But doctor, one last question. Since cognitive decline can have so many different causes, what's your usual protocol for eliminating treatable ones? Do you always run blood tests, order brain imaging, review medications?" "Those tests can be arranged if necessary," Dr. Harrison replied vaguely. "If necessary?" I repeated. "Wouldn't they be necessary before making a firm diagnosis?" The silence that followed spoke louder than any answer he could have given. A legitimate doctor would have immediately agreed that such testing was essential. His reluctance to commit to proper medical workup told me everything. He had no intention of doing a real evaluation at all. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Jessa slip into the room, moving quietly toward the tea tray. To anyone else, she was just the housekeeper doing her job, clearing cups. But I knew better. She was positioning herself exactly where she needed to be, to capture every word, every glance, every unethical decision on camera. "Mrs. Whitmore," Dr. Harrison said, clearly eager to steer us away from questions about procedure, "let's continue with the assessment. Can you tell me what year it is?" 2023, I answered, correctly but without enthusiasm. "And who is the current president?" I hesitated deliberately, knitting my brows. "That would be... oh, what's his name? The one who came after Obama." "Mrs. Whitmore," Conrad said gently, with that patronizing tone he'd perfected. "Obama left office years ago. We've had 2 presidents since then." I blinked, feigning confusion. 2? That can't be right. I remember Obama was president just... It was all an act, but Dr. Harrison latched onto it instantly, scribbling furiously on his tablet. A real doctor might have followed up, checked whether I was talking about a different time period, or clarified what I meant. Instead, he simply logged my response as proof that my mind was slipping. "Mrs. Whitmore," he went on, "can you describe your typical day? Do you manage your own medications? Handle the household finances? Drive a car?" "Conrad helps me with all of that," I said, and that, unfortunately, was true. Over the years, my husband had quietly taken over everything. He's so much better with numbers and details. "And how long has that been the case?" Dr. Harrison asked. I pretended to search my memory. "Oh, years and years. Conrad has always been the smart one in our family." Dr. Harrison nodded, as if my long-standing financial dependence somehow confirmed I was incapable, rather than raising any suspicion about potential financial control or abuse. As the evaluation went on, the full shape of their plan became clearer to me. This was far more than a bribe and a few fake records. They had crafted an entire alternate reality around me, full of invented symptoms, distorted stories, and a pre-written conclusion that I was no longer fit to make decisions about my own life. But they had seriously miscalculated one thing. They had assumed I would go quietly. As Dr. Harrison moved to wrap things up, I understood that the next few minutes might determine my future, whether I walked out of this room as a free woman, or whether I was escorted out as cargo bound for Bridgewood Manor. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, closing his tablet with a practiced air of authority, "based on my assessment today, I believe you're experiencing significant cognitive decline that requires immediate professional intervention." The words hung there, heavy and final, like a judge's sentence. Conrad leaned forward, practically glowing with anticipation, while Bridget maintained her performance of worried relative, though I could see the satisfaction glittering in her eyes. "What kind of intervention?" I asked, letting my voice shake slightly. "I'm recommending immediate placement in a specialized care facility," Dr. Harrison replied smoothly, "where you can receive constant monitoring and treatment. I've already contacted Bridgewood Manor. They have a bed available, and I believe you would greatly benefit from their program." Already contacted. He'd set up my admission before even pretending to evaluate me. The arrogance of it almost stole my breath. "Today?" I echoed, adding a layer of bewilderment. "But I don't understand. I feel fine. Can't I just take some medicine?" "Mrs. Whitmore," Conrad said softly, slipping his hand over mine, "the doctor knows what's best. And this isn't forever. Just until you're feeling better." The lie slid effortlessly from his mouth. We all knew that people sent to Bridgewood this way didn't come home. "I've prepared the necessary documents," Dr. Harrison added, drawing a stack of papers from his briefcase. "With your husband's signature as your medical power of attorney, we can arrange your transfer this afternoon." "Medical power of attorney?" I repeated, blinking as if dazed. "When did I give Conrad medical power of attorney?" A heavy silence fell. Conrad cleared his throat. "Darling, we talked about this months ago, when you were having those episodes. You signed the forms yourself." This was the first I'd heard of it, which meant those papers either didn't exist at all, or my signature on them would be a forgery. "I don't remember signing anything," I said. "That's precisely why this intervention is needed." Dr. Harrison jumped in. Being unable to remember important legal decisions is a significant indicator of cognitive impairment. The twisted logic was almost unbelievable. My failure to recall an event that never occurred was being treated as proof that I was incapable of managing my own life. But I stayed in character, confused, fragile on the outside, while inside I was raging. "Doctor," I said softly, "could I see the papers I supposedly signed? Maybe that would help me remember." Dr. Harrison's eyes flicked toward Conrad. "Mrs. Whitmore, dwelling on past confusion might only make you more distressed. Let's focus on getting you the help you need." Another glaring warning sign. Any legitimate doctor would have insisted on transparency, especially about prior consent and legal authority. His refusal to show me the documents all but confirmed they were fraudulent or non-existent. "I'd really like to see them," I pressed gently. "I think it would help me understand what's happening." "Annetta," Bridget cut in sharply, her mask slipping just a little. "You're getting worked up over nothing. What matters is that you get the proper care." "Am I getting worked up?" I turned to her with wide-eyed bewilderment. "I don't feel upset at all. I just want to understand." That simple sentence seemed to rattle all three of them. In their script, I was supposed to be frantic, confused, maybe even combative. Calm, logical questions didn't fit the picture of a woman losing her mind. "Perhaps," Dr. Harrison said, clearly eager to push things forward, "we should proceed with the arrangements. The sooner Mrs. Whitmore receives appropriate care, the better." "Actually," a new voice said from the doorway, "I think Mrs. Whitmore should be allowed to review any documents before anything is signed." We all turned. Jessa stood in the entrance to the living room. No cleaning supplies, no lowered head, no timid posture. She was standing tall, shoulders back, eyes sharp. It was like seeing a completely different woman. "Excuse me," Conrad snapped. "This is a private family matter. Please return to your duties." "I'm afraid I can't do that, Mr. Whitmore," Jessa replied calmly, walking into the room. "You see, I've been recording this entire conversation, along with every other conversation you've had in this house for the last 2 months." The silence that followed was absolute. Dr. Harrison went white. Conrad's jaw dropped. Bridget actually staggered back a step as if someone had hit her. "What are you talking about?" Conrad barked, finally finding his voice. "You don't even speak English properly." Jessa smiled, and for the first time I saw her real expression, confident, unafraid, and not remotely submissive. "I speak English flawlessly, Mr. Whitmore," she said. "I also hold degrees in criminal justice and forensic accounting. My name is Jessica Martinez, and I'm a licensed private investigator." She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and suddenly Conrad's own voice flooded the room. "The sooner we get her declared incompetent, the sooner we can access the trust fund. $3 million, Bridget. That's enough to solve both our problems." Conrad lunged for the phone, but Jessa slipped easily out of reach. "That's just one of dozens of recordings I have," she said evenly. "Would you like to hear the one where you discuss bribing Dr. Harrison? Or the one where you and your sister talk about how you'll divide Mrs. Whitmore's inheritance after she conveniently dies from complications at Bridgewood?" Dr. Harrison had already started edging toward the doorway, but Jessa's next words stopped him cold. "Dr. Marcus Harrison, license number 479862, she said. "You're not going anywhere until the police arrive." "Police?" Bridget shrieked. "You can't call the police. This is a private matter. Conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, forgery of medical records, and attempted kidnapping are not private matters, Ms. Whitmore," Jessa replied coolly. "Oh, and doctor, I should mention that I've already sent copies of everything to the state medical board. Your license will be gone by the end of the week." The color drained completely from Dr. Harrison's face. This is entrapment. You can't use recordings made without consent." "Actually, I can," Jessa cut in. "California is a one-party consent state. Mrs. Whitmore gave me permission to record conversations in her own home. Everything I've captured is fully admissible." I rose slowly from the sofa, letting go of the last traces of the confused, fragile persona I'd been performing. "Surprise," I said, looking straight at Conrad and Bridget, my voice steady. "I've been recording you too." I reached into my blouse and pulled out the tiny device Jessa had given me. Every conversation, every medical consultation, every moment when you thought you were safe to plot my destruction, it's all here. Conrad's expression shifted through a whole storm of emotions. Shock, rage, fear, and finally, a hint of grudging acknowledgement. "You knew," he said quietly. "You knew all along." "I knew you were stealing from me," I replied. "I knew you were lying. I knew you'd been drugging me with sedatives disguised as vitamins. What I didn't know, until yesterday, was that you intended to have me killed in a psychiatric facility." "Killed?" Bridget gave a shrill laugh. "Don't be ridiculous, Antoinette. We were trying to get you help." "Help?" I turned fully toward her. "I have recordings of you discussing how long it usually takes patients at Bridgewood to die. You looked up average life expectancy, Bridget. You calculated how long you'd have to wait for my death to look natural." The mask finally slipped. The look she gave me, pure hatred, unfiltered, was probably the most honest expression I'd seen from her in years. "You have no idea what you've done?" Conrad said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can just destroy this family? Our lives?" "Our family?" I laughed, and there was no warmth in it. "Conrad, you stopped being my family the moment you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive. You're criminals, and criminals face consequences." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Dr. Harrison bolted for the front hall, but Jessa was faster. She stepped into his path, grabbed his wrist, and twisted his arm behind his back with practiced precision. "I told you," she said calmly as he struggled. "You're not going anywhere." 3 police cars rolled into the driveway, lights flashing. An ambulance followed, along with an unmarked sedan that screamed, "Detective." Through the living room windows, I watched officers stride toward the front door with deliberate, unhurried purpose. For the first time in a long time, I felt something like safety beginning to return. "Mrs. Whitmore," the man at the door said as Jessa opened it. "I'm Detective Rodriguez. We received a report of elder abuse and medical fraud in progress." "That would be correct," I answered, my voice surprisingly steady for someone whose entire life had just imploded. "I think you'll want to start with Dr. Harrison. He's been trying to have me falsely committed to a psychiatric facility." As officers stepped inside, rights were read and handcuffs came out. I watched 35 years of marriage fall apart in real time. Conrad kept staring at me like he couldn't comprehend that I'd actually beaten him. Bridget was crying, but the tears were rage, not remorse. "This isn't over," Conrad hissed as the officers guided him toward the door. "You'll regret this, Antoinette. Without me, you have nothing." I met his eyes one last time. "You're wrong, Conrad. I have something you never valued. I have my dignity, I have my freedom, and now I have justice." When the police cars finally rolled away down Magnolia Drive, taking my husband, my sister-in-law, and the corrupt doctor with them, I stood in the foyer beside the woman who had just saved my life. The grandfather clock chimed 5 times, and for the first time, it truly felt like the end of one life and the beginning of another. "What happens now?" I asked Jessa. "Now," she said, her professional mask softening into something like genuine warmth. "You get to decide who Antoinette Whitmore really is when she's finally free to make her own choices." 6 months later, I stood in the same living room where Dr. Harrison had tried to erase my future. It didn't feel like the same house. The heavy velvet drapes Conrad loved were gone, replaced by light white curtains that let the California sun pour in. The dark, oppressive antiques had been donated. In their place were comfortable, modern pieces that I had chosen, my first furniture purchases in more than 3 decades. My home looked like it finally belonged to me. "Mrs. Whitmore," my attorney, Sarah Chen, said, setting her briefcase on the clear glass coffee table I'd picked specifically because it was the opposite of Conrad's beloved mahogany. "I have the final sentencing reports." I settled into my favorite new armchair, a soft blue one facing the windows instead of the television Conrad had always controlled. Jessica now, sat beside me. She was no longer my housekeeper. She was my business partner and my closest friend. Conrad received 15 years, Sarah said. Fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The prosecution proved he'd been bleeding your trust dry for over a decade, almost $800,000 funneled into failing business schemes and gambling debts. $800,000. Money my parents had carefully saved and invested to protect their daughter's future. Money I'd thought we were preserving all those years while I cut coupons and worried about expenses, because Conrad told me we needed to be cautious. Bridget got 12 years, Sarah continued. Her cooperation helped expose a larger pattern. Turns out this wasn't her first time. She's been involved in similar elder abuse scams for years, using her social connections to target wealthy widows and vulnerable older women. I wasn't surprised. Bridget's polished cruelty had always felt too practiced to be a one-time performance. And Dr. Harrison, Sarah said, received 20 years. His medical license has been permanently revoked. Investigators discovered he'd falsified competency evaluations for at least a dozen victims in the past 5 years. 20 years for a man who had twisted the power of medicine into a weapon. His victims weren't just older women, Sarah added. They included adults with disabilities whose families wanted them out of the way, and relatives standing between greedy heirs and their inheritance. She reached for another folder. The civil settlements are finalized too. Between Conrad's hidden assets, Bridget's insurance policies, and the malpractice payout from Dr. Harrison's practice, you'll recover about $1.2 million, on top of your original inheritance. $1.2 million, not a reward, not enough to erase what had happened. But it would fund the life I chose next, instead of the one chosen for me. It's compensation, Sarah said gently, for the years of manipulation, abuse, and the attempt on your life. Putting a price tag on betrayal felt strange, but if that money could be turned into something good, healing, independence, protection for others, then at least some part of the damage would be transformed. There's one more thing, Sarah said, her tone shifting. Conrad's attorney contacted me yesterday. He wants to set up a meeting. Absolutely not, Jessica said instantly. She doesn't owe him anything. Mrs. Whitmore doesn't need to walk back into that emotional minefield. I considered it. 6 months earlier, the thought of facing Conrad would have paralyzed me with fear. Now it simply felt unnecessary. What could he possibly want? I asked. According to his attorney, Sarah said, he wants to apologize. He says prison has made him reflect on what he did to you. I actually laughed, a sound that still surprises me with how light it feels now. Conrad doesn't apologize, I said. He strategizes. He's probably hoping it'll help with an appeal or parole. Tell his attorney that Antoinette Whitmore is far too busy living her life to entertain his regret. Sarah jotted that down, a small smile tugging at her lips. Over these past months, she'd watched me change, from someone trapped and controlled into someone who refused to shrink herself for anyone ever again. After Sarah left, Jessica and I sat quietly, watching the afternoon light spill across the room that no longer felt like Conrad's house, but mine. The woman who saved my life hardly covered what she'd become. I have news, Jessica said finally, pulling a folder from her bag. The Martinez-Whitmore Investigative Agency is officially licensed. Our business, a private investigation firm focusing on elder abuse and financial exploitation, born from her skills and my lived experience. We weren't just survivors anymore, we were a force. Our first case? I asked. A 73-year-old woman in San Francisco, Jessica said. Her son and daughter-in-law are isolating her and tightening their grip on her finances. The pattern is almost identical to what Conrad and Bridget did to you. The familiar anger stirred inside me, but it no longer felt like helpless rage. It felt like energy, purpose. When do we start? I asked. Tomorrow, if you're ready. I looked around the bright living room, at my parents' photos, finally brought out of storage and placed where I could see them every day. I thought of who I'd been 6 months ago, confused, alone, slowly poisoned by the people who insisted they loved me. And then I thought of who I am now, clear, focused, determined to shield others from the same fate. "I'm ready," I said. That evening, I cooked dinner in my own kitchen. Something simple but completely mine. My recipe, my seasoning, my timing. No hidden sedatives, no mysterious nausea afterward, just a meal that nourished me instead of controlling me. As I set the table for one, I realized how much my idea of independence had changed. 6 months ago, eating alone would have felt like proof that I had failed somehow, that I'd driven people away. Now I understood it as proof of something else entirely, that I get to choose who has a place at my table. The doorbell rang just as I finished eating. On the porch stood a delivery driver holding a massive bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite. Conrad always insisted roses were more appropriate, so he bought roses. The card read, "Congratulations on your new business. You're going to save so many lives. With love and admiration, Dr. Sarah Chen." Dr. Chen, the neurologist who had actually examined me properly, who testified in court that I was mentally competent and had never shown signs of dementia. Her professional integrity had helped bring everything crashing down on Conrad, Bridget, and Dr. Harrison. I arranged the sunflowers in my mother's crystal vase and set them on the dining table, where the last of the light caught their petals. The way they turned toward the sun felt like a reflection of my own life now, always seeking warmth, growth, and clarity instead of existing in controlled shadows. Later that night, I sat in my study, no longer a hiding place, but my workspace. I opened my laptop and began drafting our agency's mission statement, words flowing easily as I wrote about protecting vulnerable adults from financial and psychological abuse. My phone buzzed, a text from Jessica. "Proud to be your partner in this. Tomorrow we start saving lives." I smiled as I typed back, "Tomorrow we start living." As sleep crept in, my thoughts drifted to the 73-year-old woman in San Francisco, unaware that help was already on its way. Tomorrow, Jessica and I would begin tearing apart another web of lies, another family's greed, and pull one more person back from the edge I'd almost been pushed over. The cycle ends with us, I thought, one case at a time, one saved life at a time. Now I'm curious about you, listening to my story. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever experienced something even a little similar? Tell me in the comments, I really do read them. And while you're here, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that this channel's community loves, and they will absolutely shock you. Thank you for watching until the end.